After our wedding, my husband's father handed me a list of rules for our marriage. All major decisions go through me. He smirked when I laughed. My husband whispered, "Just go along with it." Instead, I went to a lawyer. The next time his father tried to control me, he received a document that left him speechless. So, a little background. I'm a 29-year-old female who got married last year to my husband, a 31-year-old male. We dated for about 3 years before getting married. Things were good. He's quite super logical, not the type to argue. I'm more outspoken, but we balanced each other out. However, there was always one problem: his dad. From the very first time I met his father, I knew this man thought he was the king of the world. He runs a chain of hardware stores in our state, so he has money, and he lets everybody know it. Everything is about power to him. Who's in charge, who gets the final word. His wife is quiet as a mouse, and his other sons are the same, including my husband. I thought maybe it was just how their family worked, and I didn't really push it until the wedding. We got married at this old vineyard near Charlottesville, Virginia. Simple, small, but beautiful. I was so happy that day. My family flew in from out of state. His family was there. Everything felt perfect. Then, during the reception, while people were still eating dinner, his dad asked to talk to me privately. I thought it was weird, but whatever. I figured he wanted to say something nice or offer advice. No. He handed me this folded piece of paper. I opened it. It was titled "Rules for Your Marriage." I swear I thought it was a joke, but the man was dead serious. Some examples of what was on the list. All major decisions must be approved by me. Family holidays will be hosted at my house unless I say otherwise. Any plans involving large purchases, cars, home renovations, etc., must be discussed with me first. Raising children must follow our family traditions. Disagreements are to be handled respectfully with my guidance. There were 11 rules total. I looked up at him and actually laughed. I thought surely this is some awkward father-in-law bit. He's just trying to lighten the mood. But then he said with this little smirk, "You'll understand things work smoother this way." I must have still looked confused because he added, "Just keep the peace. Everyone's happier when I'm involved." I didn't know what to say, so I just folded the paper and said, "Okay, thanks." Later that night, I showed my husband the list. He didn't even act surprised. He just said, "Yeah, just go along with it. It's easier." That's when it clicked. This man had been controlling his whole family for decades. My husband was trained to just keep his head down, smile, agree, and move on. But I am not wired like that. I didn't fight about it that night. I didn't argue. I just smiled and nodded, but in my mind the wheels were already turning. We got back from our honeymoon a week later. I waited until the dust settled and made an appointment with a lawyer in Richmond. I found someone who specialized. I specialize in boundary issues with extended family. I walked in with the list, the lawyer read it and immediately looked up at me and said, "So what exactly is your father-in-law's role in your marriage?" I told her the truth. Nothing. At least there shouldn't be one. We spent the next 2 hours going over everything: what he could do legally, what he couldn't, how to set boundaries without starting World War III, and what my rights were if he tried to interfere with finances or property. She explained that if he ever crossed into things like trying to control property titles, financial accounts, or childcare decisions, I'd have every right to shut him down. But she also said, honestly, the best thing is to make it crystal clear that you're not playing his game. We drafted a document, not a legal threat, but a formal notice that would draw the line. Something to hand over if he tried anything again. It was simple, direct, professional. It basically said, "Thank you for your interest in our household decisions. Going forward, please direct any suggestions through my husband and me together. Major decisions will be made privately between the two of us. We will not be seeking external approvals. Thank you for understanding." Clean, clear, ironclad. Then I waited. It didn't take long. 2 months later, my husband and I started talking about buying our first house. We'd been saving up for a while, started going to open houses, meeting with realtors, all that stuff. Guess who heard about it and invited us over to discuss our plans? Yep. We showed up at his house. He's already got folders on the table, listings he's picked out, mortgage plans he's printed from the bank. He's got a full-on presentation ready. My husband, of course, just sits down and starts flipping through the pages like this is normal. Meanwhile, I take out my folder and hand him the document. He opens it, reads it, quiet for once. The man had no comeback, No smug smirk, no sarcastic comment, just silence. I waited. He finally looked up and said, "Is this necessary?" I said, "Yes, it is." And that was it. For the first time since I met him, he didn't push back. He didn't argue. He just nodded. We left. After that, my husband didn't say much on the way home. He seemed relieved, honestly, like someone had finally said the thing he'd been too afraid to say his whole life. And I'm not saying it fixed everything overnight, but it changed the energy. Things have been quieter since then, at least for now. For a couple of months after I handed him that document, everything seemed calm, too calm. We bought a house just outside of Richmond. A cute 3-bedroom place with a big yard and a screened porch. My husband seemed happier than I'd ever seen him, like he was breathing fresh air for the first time. But I knew better than to believe his father was done, and I was right. It started small, little comments during Sunday dinners at his house. Things like, "Oh, you went with that neighborhood? Interesting. Hope you got the pipes checked. Those houses over there are known for issues when you're ready to remodel. I have a contractor. Don't sign anything until I approve the plans." I ignored it. I figured if I didn't feed the fire, he'd lose interest. But no, he was just getting started. About 6 months after moving in, my sister-in-law had her first baby. Of course, my father-in-law latched on hard, acting like he was the world's best grandpa. Constant visits, buying baby stuff no one asked for, telling her how to feed the baby, how to dress the baby, when the baby should sleep. It was exhausting just watching it happen. Then one night over dinner, he turned to me and said, "When you two have kids, we'll do it the proper way. I'll help set the schedule, we can use the family doctor, I'll handle the daycare search." I already have ideas. I just stared at him and my husband stayed quiet, staring at his plate. I felt the heat in my chest, but I forced a smile and said, "Well, that's a long way off." He leaned back, smug as ever. "You'll thank me. I know how these things should be done." That night, I told my husband flat out, "I'm not doing this. I'm not bringing kids into a situation where your father thinks he's the third parent." My husband just sighed and said, "I know. I don't know how to stop him. This is just how he is." I didn't sleep much that night. Then came the real twist. One afternoon, out of nowhere, my husband got an email from his dad. It was an offer to help with our mortgage, help in quotes, because here's what the offer actually said. "I'm willing to pay off a portion of your loan. In return, I'd like my name added to the deed, purely for family security. Of course, nothing will change on your end, but if anything were to happen, I can step in and make sure the house stays in the family. Let me know." I felt sick reading it. This man wasn't slowing down. He was escalating. He wanted a legal tie to our house, control over where we live, our biggest investment. And here's the worst part. My husband actually thought about it. "Maybe it's worth considering," he said that night. "It would take a lot of pressure off, less debt." That's when I realized the depth of the grip his father had on him. This wasn't just habit, it was survival mode. He couldn't even recognize manipulation when it was happening. I told him absolutely not. I don't care if we never pay off this house. He is not getting his name on anything we own. It turned into the biggest fight we'd ever had. My husband was torn between me and the man who'd been controlling him since birth. I finally said, "Look, I love you, but I'm not living under your father's thumb. I won't do it, and I'm not afraid to take steps if I have to." That got through to him. Slowly, the next day, we emailed his father back. "Thanks for the offer, but we're not interested. Our home is our own." Simple, final. But the damage was done. My father-in-law now saw me as the problem, the one pulling his son away, the one breaking tradition. About a week later, I got a call from an unknown number. I answered thinking it was a work call. It was him. "I think we should meet," he said. "Just the two of us, talk woman to man, clear the air." Something about the way he said it made my skin crawl, but I agreed. I wanted to hear what he had to say. We met at this old diner halfway between our house and his. He was already there when I arrived, sitting in a corner booth, sipping black coffee like some kind of mafia boss. I sat down, didn't bother with small talk. He leaned forward and said, "Listen, I don't know what you think you're doing, but this family has a way of operating. Always has. You can fight it all you want, but eventually you'll see it's better to have me on your side or things get difficult." I looked him straight in the eye and said, "Difficult for who?" He just smiled. I finished my water, stood up and said, Thanks for the chat. But on the drive home, I realized something. This man wasn't just trying to control us. He thought he owned us, and he wasn't going to stop until we either gave in or pushed back hard enough to make him regret it. So I called my lawyer again, and this time we started drafting something a whole lot stronger. I thought the meeting at the diner was his big play, his warning shot, but no, that was just his warm-up. The real move came a month later. It was a Saturday morning. I was out back pulling weeds when my husband came outside looking pale. I knew something was wrong right away. He just handed me his phone. It was a group text sent to him, his brothers, his mom, and me. Family meeting at my house tonight, non-negotiable. Topics: future family plans, holiday arrangements, financial security, and expectations going forward. Attendance mandatory. I stared at the screen. I asked my husband, "What the hell is this?" He shrugged. I've never seen him do something like this before. And that's when it clicked. This wasn't just about us anymore. He was pulling everyone in, his whole family. He wanted an audience. This man thought he was going to publicly put me in my place. We went. I almost didn't, but something told me I needed to see exactly what he had planned. Everyone was already there when we arrived. His dad was at the head of the dining table, papers spread out in front of him like some corporate boardroom. He started talking before we even sat down. No hello, no small talk, just straight into it. Okay, he said. There's been confusion about how things should run moving forward, so I've prepared some guidelines for all of us. We'll keep things smooth if we're on the same page. He handed out copies of a typed document. I couldn't believe it. It was basically the rules of the family written out. Formalized stuff like all property decisions require group input, major family holidays rotate and can be overridden by me, child-rearing practices will be standardized to preserve family values, and financial assistance, when offered, grants oversight rights. It went on, pages of this garbage. I looked around the table. His wife was ring at her lap. His other sons were just reading like it was normal. I finally said loud enough for everyone to hear, "This is not happening." He smirked. "I'm just keeping order. You don't see anyone else complaining." I looked at my husband. This was his moment. He had to choose a side, and I watched him just sit there silent. I felt the coldest wave of disappointment I've ever felt in my life. But I didn't lose my cool. I said, "Thank you for dinner," and I left alone. That night, I stayed at a friend's place. I needed space, and the next morning I made another call to my lawyer. We didn't just draft a stronger letter. This time we started the process of legally blocking his interference. We set up a formal no-contact notice regarding our finances and assets. We updated our property deeds, wills, and medical directives, all with specific clauses keeping him out of any decision-making. We locked everything down. But that's not even the twist. While doing all this paperwork, the lawyer uncovered something wild. Turns out, when we first bought the house, my husband's dad helped us by recommending a mortgage broker, someone he trusted. Guess what? That broker was quietly feeding my father-in-law updates on our payments, escrow accounts, and loan status. Nothing criminal, just little things. Oh, they're ahead on payments, they filed for tax reassessment. But it was a total violation of privacy. And the best part? We caught it in writing, emails, messages. The broker had CC'd my father-in-law on at least 4 messages over 6 months. So now I wasn't just mad. I had evidence, and my lawyer was giddy. She said, "If you want to go nuclear, we can. This is grounds for a formal complaint and possibly legal action." But before we even made our next move, the man tried one last stunt. Out of nowhere, he invited us out to dinner at this steakhouse downtown, just us. My husband begged me to go. He said his dad wanted to apologize, make peace. I didn't believe it, but fine, I wanted to see how deep this man's game went. We get there. The food is good, the conversation is light. He's being normal, pleasant. Then dessert comes, and that's when he pulls out a contract and slides it across the table to us. I swear on everything I have, the man tried to get us to sign an agreement giving him co-ownership rights to our property for tax benefits and future security. I just pushed it back toward him and said, "No." My husband looked like he wanted to crawl under the table, and his dad just smiled. "It's not personal, it's just business." At that moment, I realized he wasn't going to stop ever, not unless we made him. And that's exactly what I planned to do next. After that steakhouse stunt with the contract, I knew we were on borrowed time. It wasn't about peace anymore. This man was making moves like we were pieces on his chessboard, and he was trying to corner us. And my husband, he still wasn't standing up to him, not really. Every time I pushed, he made excuses. That's just how he is. Or let's not make it bigger than it has to be. But it was big. It had been big since the wedding, and I was done pretending otherwise. So I made a plan. I called my lawyer, and together we decided on the only thing that would actually end this. I told my husband we needed one more family dinner at our house, neutral ground. I said, invite everyone, your brothers, your mom, your dad, everyone who's been quietly letting this happen. He looked nervous, but he agreed. The night of the dinner, I set the table like it was any other gathering. I made sure the house was spotless, made a big meal, lit candles, soft music. The whole thing looked like it was going to be peaceful. But I had a folder sitting on the sideboard ready. They all showed up right on time. His mom, silent as always, his brothers making small talk, his dad acting like he was already the guest of honor, laughing and telling stories while sipping his usual bourbon. Dinner went by quietly, too quietly. It was like everyone felt the tension hanging in the air, but didn't know where it was coming from. And then, as we were clearing plates, I walked over to the sideboard, grabbed the folder, and laid it right in front of my father-in-law. For dessert, I said, we're going to clear something up. He looked at the folder, then at me. What's this? I said, proof of what you've been doing. The mortgage broker, the emails, the privacy violations, the contracts, the rules, the manipulation, everything. The whole table went dead silent. His wife looked like she wanted to disappear into her chair. His brother suddenly found the ceiling very interesting, and my husband just stared down at his hands. I said, you've been controlling this family for decades, but it stops tonight. You are no longer part of our decisions. You are not part of our finances. You will not be part of any future children's lives unless invited. You are not welcome to interfere in any part of our marriage or home, and if you try, I will pursue legal action, and I have all the paperwork ready to do it. I watched his face go from red to pale in under a minute, but of course he tried to recover. He laughed, actually laughed. Oh, come on, you're overreacting. This is just family business. I was helping. And then came the real twist. My husband finally spoke for the first time ever. He said, no, you weren't helping. You've been controlling me my entire life, and her and mom and my brothers, and we all just let you. But we're done. You could have heard a pin drop. His dad looked like he'd been slapped. You're serious? He asked. Dead serious. My husband pushed the folder back toward him. Leave it. Take it home, read it or don't, but this is over. You don't run us anymore. And then came the part one didn't expect. His mom started crying right there at the table. Years of silence just cracked open all at once. She said, do you know what it's been like living under this all these years? I don't even know who I am anymore. And his brothers, who'd barely spoken all night, both nodded. One of them added, I thought this was just how families worked. Now I see it's not. Meanwhile, his dad just sat there. No comeback, no jokes, no smirked. For the first time since I met him, he looked small and alone. He left before dessert, didn't say goodbye, just got up, took the folder and walked out. The room stayed quiet long after the door shut. No one really knew what to do. My husband looked at me and said, I should have said something years ago, and I just nodded. Yeah, but you did it now. His mom stayed behind to help clean up. I caught her staring at the door a lot, like she half expected him to come back. He didn't, at least not that night. The next week was weird. No calls from him, no emails, nothing. It was like he just vanished. My husband seemed lighter, freer, but also sad in a way I didn't expect. I think he finally realized how much of his life had been spent trying to keep his dad happy. And me? I felt exhausted, angry, but also relieved, not just for myself but for the whole family. Because here's the truth. It was never just about me. It was about a man who built his entire identity on control and what happens when the people you control finally wake up. A few weeks later, his dad finally sent an email. It was short. I've read everything. I see where this is going. I'll keep my distance for now. No apology, no real admission, but honestly, that was probably the closest we'd ever get. And that was fine because the difference now was clear. This time it wasn't up to him anymore. We had the power and we weren't giving it back.